Good morning.
Good morning from Corpus Christi.
All right. So today we're talking about something very, very important that has gotten to be actually a big, big issue, big problem over the last several years, mainly from a few different places. But like, there's a couple of standards that have kind of set what we're talking about in stone, and then others kind of develop their own little spin-offs of things that have caused problems. So what we're talking about today is diamond certificates. Somewhat some of the process of how they do these certifications, what they mean whenever you're kind of looking through them, and the differences between all these different certs, because there's a bunch of different places that you can get them. So
Yeah, we'll probably be somewhat a little bit vague about the differences between the certs, but I think everybody out there, whenever they they go in and ask for a certificated stone, they think whatever that cert says that
that means the
it's
same across the board.
the same across the board,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. So that's kind of why we wanted to talk about it a little bit. It's maybe, hopefully, we kind of clarify or maybe take some of that confusion out of there. It's still going to be somewhat confusing because even whenever we're dealing with it, we're a little bit biased because we know what the problems are out there.
Yeah.
So I think for basically the consumer, they don't have an idea that there's actually any difference between certs. And sometimes that cert doesn't tell the whole story about the diamond, no matter.
Sometimes just straight up misleading.
Yeah, but sometimes it doesn't tell the whole story about that diamond, no matter who does the cert. So, kind of to get this started a little bit, is I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the history of diamond grading. Back before the GIA's diamond grading standards was done, basically cutters and to some degree even the mines or countries where diamonds were being mined at, they had their own set of standards for color grading and clarity grading, and a lot of them didn't grade cutting at all.
Which we actually still see some of that going on in the colored stone industry to an extent. Because it hasn't quite got to that perfection of what diamond has, but it's not really as needed.
And it's probably in the colored stone business, it's going to have to be somewhat adapted to maybe each colored stone because
they all have their
probably the biggest thing
things.
would be aquamarine most of the time is really clean. That means that there's very few imperfections or clarity issues, I guess. But emerald, which is actually the same stone, just a different color, always has some kind of clarity. So what could be, what maybe would be called slightly included in emerald,
would be high end,
and you couldn't even buy an aquamarine that had that many inclusions in it. I mean, it's just. Well, you could, but
you wouldn't
for the most part, I mean, the jeweler doesn't even buy it that way. So, but anyway, that's a little bit off subject. But kind of what I was talking about is before 1953, there were, I don't know, 20 or 30 maybe different
ways of grading.
Ways of grading. You know, some of them used terms like Wesselton, some of them used letters like AA and AAA, and some of them used numbers, and some of them used letters and numbers, and so there was.
Some of them used smoke signals and hand signals.
For the most part, nothing, you couldn't even translate from one grading system to the other. And I say you couldn't.
There was no Rosetta Stone for it.
Right. There were people that understood within the industry, maybe how to translate from one to the other. But when you had like maybe 20 or 30, it's almost like, okay, I can speak English and I can speak maybe French, but I don't know how to do the Portuguese thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what word translates to that? So that was what their problem was. So there's a little thing started by uh, Mr. Shipley
Yep.
in 1931, I think is what it was. And he actually started what was called the Gemological Institute of America.
Or
And
GIA.
right. And that was basically an educational thing because, oh, you brought in the cert?
Yeah.
Didn't even think about that.
Oh, we're going to talk about them. We
Yeah.
might as well have some to talk about.
So, anyways, back then, there were a few jewelers that kind of knew what was going on with diamonds and colored stones and stuff. But for the most part, nobody really knew anything. I mean, it's kind of whatever they picked up from maybe a supplier or where they bought something at, you know, they get a little bit of history or a little bit of education that
And
way.
then they just embellish it however they
Yeah.
felt like it.
So
Yeah.
Mr. Shipley knew that somewhere along the line this is going to cause problems within the industry
Yeah.
and confusion to the public that's trying to buy this jewelry and stuff. So he started GIA, which was basically the educational part. And one of the first instructors that he had was a guy by the name of Richard T. Liddicoat. And I don't know how long Shipley was basically in charge of GIA. It was quite a while. But a little while after he started GIA, he also started the American Gem Society, which is AGS. And the AGS was kind of like the ethical arm of the jewelry business. Shipley was really worried about that there was going to be so much misunderstanding and misleading stuff going on in the jewelry business. He said, we need to be able to educate that jeweler, and at the same time we need to somewhat hold them to standards within the industry. So that's why we've got this guy started two different things that are probably the most well-known or most prestigious organizations in the jewelry business, which is the GIA
And
American
what's great about it is even though they actually use different scales to show what their grading is, they do translate.
Right.
So, you know, like by GIA, they use letters and symbols for the grading, like
Letters
color
and
stuff.
numbers.
Yeah, and then with AGS, they're using a series of numbers to show each different grading. But at least with this, they have a system of translation so that we can actually translate between the two,
And
they hold their standards pretty well.
yeah,
the good
the
thing.
reason they did that, which probably doesn't make a lot of sense to people out there, they go, well, okay, this guy started both of these organizations, and then here he's got one that's doing letter and number thing, and then the other one is doing just all numbers, and they've actually got different numbers of grades of some things. But the reason they did that is there was, after the American Gem Society got started, early on, they recognized that cutting influenced not only the beauty of that stone, but it also influenced the price of that stone.
Yeah.
And back whenever this was originally done, there wasn't a lot of cutters in the world that were, I guess I'll say, great cutters. They didn't have the technology, know-how, or skill maybe to cut today what we call ideals or even super ideals.
Yeah.
So, and we're basically talking about round diamonds. Round diamonds have kind of set the standards for things all along, and one reason for that is because round diamonds are the most popular shape of diamond in the world.
Yeah.
So in 1953, this Richard T. Liddicoat would have been president of GIA.
Yeah.
He'd kind of taken over from Shipley, And Liddycoat came up with the diamond standards for GIA. And basically, you get right down to it, what he did is all of these other grading systems that were in the world, uh, they basically could all relate to the GIA standards. Now, the problem got to be is it's kind of like you go to Russia and you only speak English, you'd have to have a translator. So to some degree, Liddycoat actually translated that. I mean,
Yeah.
everything was compared to GIA standards. And those have been pretty well maintained throughout.
There's been some changes along the way,
Yeah.
some leniencies that have come in, I guess you could say.
And, you know, I went through GIA in 77, 78. And I had, it wasn't a classmate, but a guy that would have been right behind me that we were actually, I had a cousin that went through GIA at the same time. It was in his class. That guy is actually a research, I guess I'd say a research scientist for GIA.
Mm-hmm.
And probably about, I'm going to say maybe 10 or 12 years ago, we started seeing, like Colton was talking about, what I thought was a little bit of leniency. Actually, it got to the point where I thought they would change
Their standards.
And it wasn't in the color grading,
No.
but it was in clarity grading. And to kind of give you an idea a little bit about, we haven't really talked about those standards, but this is, since I've already brought it up, the biggest changes in price clarity-wise is between something that we can't see with a microscope at 10 power magnification and something that we can see, which would be the difference between flawless and a VVS stone. And VVS means very, very slightly included.
Yeah.
So there's a big change there, and then there's a big change between I can see it with magnification and I can see it with my eye.
So between SI and I.
Right. So
Which is slightly included and included.
we were starting to see stones that were being certified by GIA that I would have graded, or I was grading
As an I.
as an I1.
Yeah.
And they were calling them SI2s.
Yeah.
So I called Shane McClure up and I said, what's going on here? I said, I'm starting to see these eye visible inclusions and you guys are calling them SI2s. Oh, no, he said, we haven't changed. It's the same way we graded back whenever we were at GIA. And I go, I don't remember that if I could see it with my eye that was going to be an SI2.
And see, whenever I went through, that's how we were taught. It was basically proportion to the size of the stone, so you had to take some of that. It was a relevancy between the size of the inclusion and the size of the stone to determine what grade it got. So there was a little bit of a gray area there that we actually have definition of, but it's still, they have a very precise definition of it, but it can kind of slightly be interpreted a little bit differently depending on who's looking at the stone.
Well, and I think they were somewhat influenced by, I'm going to say, the cutters or the diamond industry.
Yeah.
And they're not going to admit this. And I may be wrong. I mean, I don't know that I know everything or everything I know is right. But I think what the deal is one of the other labs that came up after GIA started certing stones, they came up with a term. They were using GIA's terms, but they came up with a stone that was graded an SI3.
Yeah.
Which an SI3 doesn't exist in
Nope.
GIA terms.
Nope.
So that SI3 was actually a
An
good
I1.
a good I1.
Yeah.
So I think
But it sounds better when you're selling it.
yeah,
Like an SI3 over an I1, that sounds much better.
And the I symbol in GIA's terminology means imperfect. So that means
Or included.
We were taught that it said imperfect. So there was.
Well, it's included now.
Oh, so
They have changed some verbiage a little bit.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
But
got the
anyway,
book,
so an SI3 means, you know, slightly included. So an I means included.
yeah,
And to some degree, maybe the imperfect that we got would have been coming from the other side, maybe from the cutter or the diamond producer side, which they would have called imperfect.
yeah,
But anyways, to call something slightly included 3 would be better than be able to call it, would be,
Included.
that stone would be more expensive than being called included
yeah,
1.
yeah. Which actually they were the same thing, but because of this terminology, it sounded better, and those that weren't, I guess, as educated in that grading area was selling it at the SI2 prices or slightly below whenever there was actually a big gap between
Yeah, the biggest,
SI2 and the I1 stones. There's a huge gap in prices if everything else is the same.
you know,
But by inserting this other grade that actually doesn't exist, they were able to charge more for the stone that was actually in this I1 category, which there's a range in all of these.
Right.
There is a little bit of a range. There's not like, okay, well, we got 5 little needles or crystals in here, so this is in here, and if you get a 6th one, it goes into the next grade. It doesn't work like that. It's because each stone is about as different as a fingerprint. They have to, or we have to take into consideration the proportions, the size, the nature of those inclusions and stuff like that to set that grade. So there is a range that they fall in, just like color. Color has a slight range. It's maybe a little bit, it's not as, I guess it'd be more temperamental there because there's very strict lines there,
you
but
can, yeah,
it's
you
slight
can,
ranges.
there are, you know, we have a set of
Master stones.
GIA master stones, so they've been graded by GIA to their standards.
Yep.
And I'm going to say, I don't know that there are just a ton of people out there that have GIA masters. I know at one time,
A lot of people have the CZ
yeah, they have,
masters, which really aren't
it's not the
ideal. They're not as accurate. And to kind of give you an idea with those master stones, there's a lot of criteria that those stones themselves have to meet. For one, they have to be a VS quality, so that they don't have inclusions that are maybe influencing the color of that stone. They have to be a 1/4 carat or larger, and they have to meet that exact color grade that they're assigned. Some of them, like our stones, are a split grade, so they're actually exactly halfway in between 2 color grades, which helps us because instead of having a larger set of master stones, we've got a smaller set that we can actually grade a still wide range of stones with.
right. What happens whenever these master stones are done, there are, like what we did with ours, we actually had a cutter that we were using submit master stone or submit stones in the size and the cutting that we were using to
Yep.
GIA. And I don't know how many they ended up doing, but I'm kind of guessing that maybe they supplied, of each one of those stones, they probably supplied 50 stones.
Yeah.
And GIA actually weeded them out till they got to a stone. And these guys knew what we were looking for to begin with. So,
Yeah,
you
so
know,
they're
we have
really
5 master stones. There is a possibility that they sent maybe as many as 250 stones to make up this master.
just this one set. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're very, very strict with that, and that's just for the color.
Yeah.
So there's not master stones for
Clarity.
clarity or cutting.
Because there's, like Colton said, there's other factors.
Yeah.
In color grading, there are known standards for each of those color grades. And I guess now we've kind of got into the
transitioned a little bit.
A
here.
little bit. We'll just talk about color. In white diamonds, which that sounds a little bit weird. Everybody thinks, well, everything is white, but there's actually 23 shades of white diamonds.
Yeah.
And what's even more amazing about this, or to give you an idea of how difficult this is, you know, to pick out white paint, that seems like that's difficult, but that's actually an opaque color, and it's actually fairly easy to put you know, a known white up against something, and you can see the
You can
difference
see the
pretty
difference.
easy,
But
because
whenever it's transparent,
whenever it's a
then it's a
transparent color.
whole different story, which
Yeah.
is what we're working with. We're working with a transparent color. And so it's like looking through the window of your car, and you know, if you've got
A little film
a
on
little
there.
film on it,
You may not even notice it.
you may not notice, but you know, you may put it right next to one that maybe has a 1% difference in
When you
tint.
turn your windshield wipers on, and it gets better.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It's
didn't
just
even notice that was.
yeah, so there, you know, it's one of those things that whenever you're looking at a transparent color, it's much more difficult to see. You know, it's just like, well, I guess another good example is the difference between colors of light or color temperature of light. You know, if you have something that's 4,000 Kelvin versus something that's 3,500 Kelvin, a lot of people may not notice the difference in color there, but you get something that's 27 and 5,000, you're going to notice a huge difference because one's almost going to have a little bit of a blue to it, and the other one's going to have more of a warmer yellow. And that's kind of what we're looking for in these diamonds too, but we're doing on a much, much, much smaller scale.
Yeah. And what happens in color grading is the scale, those 23 stones are graded, kind of split up into groups.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and I'll just tell you that the color grading starts the whitest, or the stone that's free of any tint or shade of color, is called a D in color. So it goes from D to Z. So that's where the 23 shades come up. So the DEF is considered the colorless range. And there is very little difference between a D, E, and an F. And, you know, Colton and I both had to take the 5-stone test.
You didn't want one of those.
And well, you didn't want a D or an E, because, and I don't know if it's different whenever you were grading, but we couldn't miss the color by
More than a grade.
by more than a grade, or you failed that stone.
Yeah.
And if you failed any stone, then you had to take the 5-stone test over.
Yeah.
And you only got
Three
we
chances.
got three chances.
Or you had to start the class over.
Yeah, start the class over. So, you know, you definitely, and it was kind of like Russian roulette, because they had this little box,
And you had to pick.
and nothing on there said, all it had on there was a
The
paper
stone
number,
number.
stone
Yeah.
number. And so, you know, and it'd been great if somebody got one of those and they'd say what number it was, but you couldn't do that either. But,
Nope.
so it was like Russian roulette. We knew that there were D's and E's in there, but you for sure didn't want to get one, because the difference between a D and an E wasn't actually a tint shade. To the way I was taught to grade, it was almost the difference of almost like transparency. You know, it's almost like on a D you can see through it easier than what you can an E.
Yeah.
But you could put a D and an E literally side by side and color grade them. And I'm going to say a lot of people, if they're doing it the very first time, I'm going to say they
We'll
may
never
pick,
be able to tell the difference.
half the time they would pick the E, and half the time they'd pick the D, trying to pick the D in color.
Yeah. And yeah, I had that experience because the very first stone that I got on my 5-stone test was a combination of the two worst things you could get. For one, you didn't
Flawless?
want a D, E, or F for color, and you also didn't want anything that was VVS to flawless.
Right.
My first stone was an E VVS 1.
Uh,
So that was the worst one. Actually, after we did the 5-stone test, I found out that was the worst one in the box that you could pick.
Yeah.
I got it the very first
but
one.
you got it right.
I got it right. Actually, the only thing I missed on that stone was actually something that had to do with cutting, and I missed it by like a percentage on proportions.
And he had it a little worse on the GIA. Whenever I went through GIA, GIA was basically the only lab in the world that was sorting diamonds. And that sounds great for GIA, but not long after, well, actually it was happening while I was in school. The gold and silver prices were going up, and there was a lot of speculation in those metals. and then it transferred over to the diamond part. Well, the rarest white diamond is a D flawless. So there were people out there that were cutting stones, and they were trying to get a carat or larger because that was kind of like that standard. If you had a carat D flawless, there were people out there that
They didn't really care how it looked otherwise.
no.
It was just that.
So there were
prestige.
some ugly D flawless diamonds out there that were a carat. But what they were doing is those cutters are not stupid out there. You know, if they have a crystal that they know is D in color, and they can cut that stone large enough and not get any inclusions in it, that's what they're going to do no matter what the thing looks like.
Yeah.
So there were people out there that were buying D flawless diamonds because those things were just escalating. I mean, the industry had never seen prices for diamonds like what was happening then. So I had people out of my class that had already went through the diamond part, because this was actually happening while I was out at GIA, that people were having them come in to grade their diamonds before they sent them into GIA, and they were kind of like that pre-grading, just to make sure that they were going to fall in that grade that they wanted that stone to get.
Yeah.
But we didn't have to grade for cutting, and the biggest reason that I heard is that GIA understood, and the United States understood, that an ideal cut was the best way to cut around.
Yeah.
Well, Europe had a little different idea of what that stone proportions and things should be. And they were cutting and believed that a 60-60 stone, so it was like 60% table and 60%
And what that translates to is we're actually meaning the percentage in relation to the diameter of the stone.
Yeah.
So that's where some of those percentages sometimes people get. That it seems a little bit misleading, but we're talking about so a 60 depth would be 60% or just over
of the diameter.
half the percent of the diameter of the stone. Yeah.
And then the table was 60% of the diameter of the
stone.
Of the stone.
Yeah.
So anyways, just before I got there, GIA was basically, I just call it like a professional jeweler school. And so we had, somewhere along in that diamond course, we had to basically evaluate a diamond and determine how much that stone should sell for, or cost. It wasn't really sell for, but cost. And so what we ended up is we had a set of tables with prices in it, but that, I think if I remember right, 72 was the last one of those that they put out. And the reason for that, GIA had gotten to be so good at diamond grading and over the world, and everybody recognized that what they were doing was right, that whenever they were putting out these prices according to their standards, the Federal Trade Commission started to think, they're price fixing.
Yeah.
So what they ended up doing is they quit publishing that deal. But for us to be able to evaluate a stone, we were still using that 72 table, even though we were 77, 78. And so you can actually still use the same methodology that we learned in GIA, and you can just take a diamond list, which there's maybe not a jillion of them, but there are a lot of them out there. And you can actually figure out, if that stone's actually, you get the stone in, you grade it, you can actually figure out that that's actually
what it should go for,
or it's a good buy or a bad buy or whatever. But so I didn't have to worry about the cutting grade. That would have made it the 5-stone test even worse.
So what he was dealing with was basically just this stuff down here on our little scale, and I know this is backwards, but basically all of this up here at the top has to do with cutting.
We were doing it, but we didn't have to grade the stone on that.
Yeah. Now there's so much importance put on cut grade now because of the ideals that have come out, the super ideals, and how they face up or how they look whenever the table is up facing you. That this has become a huge issue because that ideal cut commands a premium over stuff that is just a very good or good, even an excellent cut.
And
Is
to
below
some
that.
degree, that's starting to change because there, like Colton said, there was so much importance put on the cutting because the cutting actually makes the diamond pretty.
Yeah.
The color and the clarity are rarity factors that, to some degree or to most degree, they actually don't affect beauty at all.
And with cutting, that's actually the only thing that man can influence with the stone, and the stone still be considered natural.
Right.
Because anything else is an enhancement that is not natural to the stone, whether it's color or clarity or whatever.
And a little bit to kind of differentiate between GIA and AGS. Once AGS was established, and those guys kind of found out what was going on with the diamond business, they started understanding that cutting was more important than what the color and clarity was, especially for the beauty of that stone. So in their grading, they kind of deviated from GIA because I don't remember now when that started, but way before GIA started grading for cutting, they actually had color grade, clarity grade, and a cutting grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so to kind of differentiate from GIA, because GIA was in that deal where they didn't want to offend their, I'll say, European customers by putting a cut grade on there. They just graded color and clarity. They put down the information that if you were smart enough, you could figure out how well the diamond was cut.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they didn't tell you that this was, excellent cutting, or in AGS terms, GIA would have been a triple X and AGS would be a 000.
Yeah.
So, that didn't happen until.
Which sounds bad, a 000. Normally people say like on a scale of 1 to 10 is 10's always the best, but on theirs you want the lowest number.
Yeah.
As the best one.
So that's kind of how the two went, but what ended up happening is, everybody somewhere along the line, they noticed that, GIA is making a lot of money by certificating these diamonds. I'm a GIA grad, or I know about diamonds. Why don't I start a lab and I can grade them and I'll just charge a little less?
Yeah.
And so there are labs that have sprung up, and
they're just like, all of a sudden they're just become like a whole slew of these labs that were saying that they were basically grading to GIA standards, but they kind of had a little bit more
what they were
leniency.
using was GIA
terminology, but not grading to their standards.
Right. They
which
had
is
a whole set of standards that were different.
And that's where
the other thing was they weren't consistent.
Yeah, and that's where these issues with certificates have come in. And that's where, with our experience and our education, that's where this helps our customers a lot, is because we can actually explain what the differences are between these, and it kind of keeps us out of trouble too, because we know there's been a lot of jewelers out there that they've even had so much as losing their store over issues with diamond certificates because of terminology and translation and basically disclosure to the customer of how some of these labs work, that has gotten people in trouble that, otherwise, had these standards been kept up in every aspect through every lab, it wouldn't have been an issue. But it's gotten to the point where there are some labs out there that we've even heard of diamond cutters actually sending their stones in and requesting a grade. And if they paid them, basically they would just assign this grade to them, even though that probably wasn't right. And there's been some labs we've seen them miss a single grade by as much as five grades.
Seems like it happens more in color than it does clarity.
Yeah, but there's some labs that there's a couple of them that we almost basically refuse to sell their stones, or at least sell their certificate, because they're notorious for being off. And with us, we do it a little bit different than what most stores do anyway. It doesn't matter what lab it's coming from. We're going to regrade it whenever it comes into into
Yeah,
the
so,
store.
and when he said it doesn't matter what, if it's, you know, I think, in my mind, just from the search that I've seen here over the last 5 or 6 years, I'm going to say that I think maybe the American Gem Society, the AGS lab, is probably a little stricter on their grading than what GIA is.
And probably the most accurate on a consistent basis.
Yeah, but there's not a huge amount of difference. But even on those, like Colton said, we have a stone that we're looking at that's got a GIA cert. We still regrade that stone.
Yep.
And again, it sounds like, well, then they think they're better graders than what GIA or AGS is. The problem, that isn't the problem. The problem is if that stone comes in and I don't think, or Colton doesn't, or the two of us don't think that we actually agree with that grading, the ultimate buck stops with us.
Yep.
This is whatever lab you pick or cert that you have, that's their opinion of what that stone is.
Yep.
Now, the problem gets to be is just like all these labs, GIA, AGS, there's a possibility that they'll miss a grade.
Yep.
It doesn't happen all that often, but there are some out there that are a lot more consistent at missing a grade.
Yeah.
And most of them, it's more color than it is clarity, because to some degree that color, there are going to be jewelers out there, and even probably cutters, and maybe cutters are a little better at it. They think that they can actually grade that stone by not grading it against a set of master stones.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is a color comparison. You're doing a transparent color comparison.
And you're just doing it by memory.
Yeah, it's like, I remember what that color looked like. Well, I can almost tell you that, and maybe I'm not the great paint picker outer, but somebody tells me that I need to go out and buy white paint, and nobody's got names on there or anything, so I pick one out. There's a good chance I didn't pick the right white paint.
You might come back with a blue or something.
No, probably not that. But there might be a little bit of tin in there that wasn't supposed to be. So.
Hey, John, we've got him tuning in from India. So
he's not in California?
No, I guess not. Well,
the internet reaches that far.
Tell Gargi and the rest of the family hello. But yeah, we are talking about the lab certs here. We've heard stories of basically stores that had sold a stone based on a lab report, and then basically that lab report get nullified by the customer having it regraded and then coming back onto that jeweler for misrepresenting the stone. And so it's a major deal, especially for us, to make sure that each stone that comes in here is accurately graded, regardless of the lab that is certing it.
Right.
But we, like I said before, there's some that we almost refuse to sell by their cert and even mention it sometimes because they can be so off.
We still actually buy them. What happens out there is the public has been so trained to buy
the cert,
buy a diamond by the cert.
Yeah.
That, what happens with some of these where they're off on color or clarity grading, and maybe to some degree even the cutting grade, is, you're not actually comparing apples to apples. They're using the same terminology, but that terminology has different standards.
Yeah.
Or has a broader standard.
Well,
sometimes, and then the other thing is maybe they're not consistent even in their standards.
Yeah, because like with GIA, I mean, I've even got it right here, and if it was the right direction, you guys could read it. But, they have very specific definitions of what these grades should be, and they're very well defined,
but still subjective.
But yeah, there's still that range there. But that's why we go to school for this. That's why we're trained to do this. We don't. It's not like we just go in, we read all the text and everything, and take our 5-stone test. We see like hundreds of stones before this that we have to go through, and so we're getting a sample of all of these different grades and combinations of grades. in color and clarity, cutting, polish, everything that can go into a basically the gradings that determine the value of that stone and the rarity of that stone. And so, through all this intense training to figure out, how this should be done, that's where we can either validate or disprove a lab report that is coming with these stones. And so we know, and we can sleep at night whenever we sell a stone to a customer, knowing that maybe this report is a grade off, but now we've explained to the customer what that is, and they know, and we can provide our own report on that stone, or we can verify one. With a lot of the GIA and AGS reports, there hasn't been but a few times that they've actually been off. We've maybe had to call a few times to find out what the reasoning was behind a certain grade, but after some explanation and some back and forth, we've maybe been able to verify that. But there's some of these are just notorious for being off.
I still have problems, even though I've been explained to a couple times about
with the clarity,
with the imperfect or the eye visible thing, is some of those stones that are graded in SI2, probably the larger stones, I won't buy them, or I actually will value them differently. And if that doesn't work out, we just don't buy the stones. It's one of those things where I guess I've got that ingrained in me that if I can see that inclusion with my eye, that stone is going to be graded an I1.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, and Colton and I have never talked about this, but we're talking about big stones, and they somewhat kind of changed the grading there. There are Melly, which are little bitty diamonds, and now they're cutting little bitty diamonds.
Ideal and super 50, ideals.
Yeah, 58 facets on something that
is a half pointer, and we're talking like less than a millimeter or less in diameter.
Yes.
It's like
you sneeze and you could lose them all.
Yeah, you could.
You're getting ready to set some today.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that.
But anyways, what happens is there are stones that I'm going to say that they call slightly included, that you can't see the inclusion with your eye because the stone's so small.
Yeah.
But actually, they should probably be maybe even I2s.
Yeah.
But they're going to be
again.
SI.
That's where that definition is it's based on its proportion relevant to the size of the stone.
Well, I'm going to say that the proportion, there is more in that SI2 little stone, considerably more proportion-wise than what there is in the bigger stone.
Well, then that one's not graded right.
but again, it gets to be one of those things, you can't see it.
Yeah.
You get the stone is so small.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, but like with...
What is it, just that comfort range between...
quarter carat and 2? Yeah, but it is, there is still some slight vagueness in some of that clarity grading, mainly in that one little area, in that SI to I1 range is basically where the vast majority of that gray area is at. And the reason for it is, like I said before, each stone is about as different as a fingerprint. So we're having to grade each fingerprint, basically. And
Never thought about it that way.
So it's one of those deals that, you can't put a finite line of where thing starts and stops.
Some have bigger hands than others, is that what you're saying?
Yes, some have bigger hands than others. So, yeah.
But the other thing is, the reason that these labs have existed and some prospered is some of them some of them do grade faster than what GIA does.
But that doesn't necessarily, and that usually doesn't translate into accuracy.
The other thing is they're normally less expensive than what GIA is. And then the other thing is, I'm going to say greed kind of works into this a little bit. If
Definitely.
you buy a stone that's a GIA, we'll say an HI1, and that stone may be graded by another lab would be maybe
A
a
GSI two
one.
or SI1,
Yeah.
you're gonna send it to that lab to get that certificate.
Well, or let's say that the consumer's out there and they've got the choice between an HI1 that's the same price as a GSI2.
Yeah.
They're thinking, okay, why would
Why
I
would I go with the lower color and clarity
when
when I
I
can get better color and clarity for less?
and actually what happens is there's a good possibility that even the GSI2
Is
is lower
actually
lower than what the HI1 is.
Yeah, and we've seen that. We've seen that happen a lot, and that's where people can get in trouble with that. If they're putting too much in the certificate and what's on the paper versus what is actually
Right in front of
right in front of them in the stone.
And the other thing gets to be, and I guess why we're trying to bring this up is, you know, you can't necessarily, you're not buying that diamond from a lab.
Mm-mm.
You're buying that from a jeweler. So, you know, the lab can maybe make you feel warm and fuzzy because you think you're buying a better one. But what you actually need to know is that stone graded correctly?
Yeah,
If you're going to buy a serted stone, and there are diamonds out there that are not serted that are possibly prettier and a better price than what a serted stone is.
yeah, yeah.
But you still have to be able to,
The
and I'm going to say trust the jeweler. But the other thing is that trust could be where we could actually, or the jeweler could actually show you why this is the grade it is.
Yeah, so education there on their side is a big key factor whenever you're buying a stone because, like what we're saying is basically what it comes down to. These lab reports are all fine and dandy, and help for somebody that's maybe not well educated in it. But the problem gets to be is some of these labs are not as true to the terminology as what they should be in order to represent the stone correctly. And unless you're educated enough to see those differences and make those corrections, you may think you're getting a great deal by buying this stone that is graded by so and so lab as this, for instance, like what we were saying, the GSI1, but in reality, by actual standards and somebody that's trained to grade and um, you know, grade that stone correctly, it may be an HI1, I2. You don't know. And so the thing is it seems like a really great deal because, okay, well, for instance, let's say it's a carat stone and it's $5,000, and that sounds great because the other GSI1 that you looked at is 7,500. But when it comes down to it, the price is reflecting the true grade of that stone. So if in fact that was a GSI1, it should be that 7,500, but because it's not, it's priced at where it should have been graded, which was probably an HI1.
And that's not always the case either. I
No.
mean, I've had certificated stones come into the store that were graded not by, well, I'll just say they were asserted stone, and the price that they had on there is what I should have sold the stone for.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're trying to do is sell me it at what retail price was.
Yeah.
And it was because the grading was actually off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it could be a huge difference. Could be, I'm going to say maybe 50 to 60%, depending on how
accurate that
or
certificate.
inaccurate it is.
Yeah. And so, we're not trying to scare everybody away from the certificates and everything. Like we said, they are good for.
They're at least a start.
They're a start, but
you have
unless
to have somebody to be able to interpret that
yeah,
cert.
I mean, you're not gonna it. We always say that we're kind of looked at like doctors. For one, information that comes in here, doctor, information that comes in here, it stays here. We're not, we've got a lot of trust that's put in us, not only with what we're selling and what we're selling to people, because this is probably one of those areas that people are the least educated on, and it's no one's fault other than, it's not a purchase that you make every day, and not everybody is into gems and gemology like we are. So it's not like everybody's bought a car and probably bought multiple cars, and so they know the general ins and outs of how to buy a vehicle. But not everybody's bought a diamond, especially large diamonds.
But I don't know that I would know, just from experience, I guess, but I don't know that I'd know a good car from a bad car for the most part.
Okay.
I mean, if I look at the outside,
then we'll say food or clothes.
But what I'm saying is that's kind of the same predicament I think a lot of people are in. You can look at the outside of that car and go, "Wow, that's really great." I mean, it could be just a shell. I mean, it don't have a motor, or maybe you look on one side and there's not even tires on the other side. I mean, that's kind of a little bit of what these certs are. I mean,
except we're doing this on a microscopic scale instead of parking lot scale.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those deals that, like I was saying, we're kind of looked at as doctors because we know the ins and outs of everything. We can explain it to you, and we have that trust that's put in us to make sure that we are representing these stones and everything correctly, and that we're explaining those to you. And if we don't have the knowledge and the expertise to do that, then somewhere along the line, that trust is probably not going to be fulfilled, because we're, like in the case of
better than the labs.
Yeah, in that case, we could be like some of these jewelers that have just kind of popped up and say, "Hey, I want to run a jewelry store," and they start selling these certed stones or certed stones for what the lab say they represent, but that lab got paid off by the cutter to represent it as a certain grade, and so say that person moves and has that stone regraded by somebody that does know what they're doing, and it comes back being 3 shades different in color and 2 shades different in clarity, they're going to be really upset.
2 shades different in clarity? I've never heard that one.
2 grades different in clarity. They're gonna be really upset, and that's happened in a few instances where those jewelers just didn't know. They were putting all their trust in the lab when that was their downfall. The lab was not correct, and so in the end,
it comes back to
back to the jeweler.
The lab did not own that diamond anywhere along the line.
No,
it's just their
interpretation of it.
It's their opinion of what that color and clarity grade is. So what happens is the cutter or the broker, whatever you want to call them, they own that at one time. So there's a possibility that they're saying that their opinion agrees with the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the jeweler buys that stone or sells that stone, whichever the case may be, it's still going to have to buy it somewhere along the line. Then they're saying that that diamond is what the cert says, unless they say different.
Yeah, unless they're knowledgeable enough to make that correction and represent it correctly.
So you get right down to it, and I guess there's a lot of maybe jewelers out there that don't understand that. It's, you can't blame the lab for misgrading that stone. I mean, you can.
Well, you can, but it's not going to do you any good whenever the customer
if you basically buy it, you're either saying you agree with it, and then if you basically sell the cert with the diamond, then that's
how you're representing it.
Yeah.
And you may misrepresent that stone in a sense that's basically false advertising.
And basically it's all on you.
Yeah. And so you're liable for that stone. The jeweler is liable for that stone.
And the reason we bring this up is, we have, maybe not daily, but a lot of the times we have people come in and they'll say, "Well, I want a F SI1 or FVS1," and for the most part, and basically they're talking they want a certed stone.
Yeah, and they're asking for that because they feel like that's the only way that they're going to guarantee that they get what they're wanting.
And for the most part, they don't even know what they're asking for.
Yeah.
But And we're not trying to make this complicated, but at the same time, uh, we would like people to understand that there are choices out there, and there are maybe some choices better than others, but just because a cert says that that's what that stone is, depending a lot of the times on who's doing the certification, that may not be true.
Yeah.
Um,
And I've got some certs here just to kind of show you some examples of how these look and everything.
Except it's backwards.
Yeah, except it is backwards,
go
but
down
you can kind of see a little bit of what's going on here. But like with these GIA ones, they're going to give you all the dimensions, the proportions, and all the terminology that explains what this stone is, and then they also plot the inclusions. If there are inclusions, they'll
But not
plot
all
them
of
on.
them.
No, but they will make comment on there if there are basically minute inclusions that don't affect that clarity grade that are excluded from that plot. They're basically showing you
Why they graded it what they did.
yeah what is setting that clarity grade. Now the problem gets to be is when you get into some of these other labs that for instance like this one, they're showing that there is a plot here, but they're not actually putting the inclusions and everything on here, which I think is weird.
What grade is that?
This one, a JVS2 is what they're saying. So
And
I guess there are small ones there, but I've seen them where they just basically left them blank. The problem gets to be is
I've never seen one.
especially with some of these, outside of GIA and AGS, basically immediately we start to question what that grading is. And whenever we're talking to our diamond suppliers and stuff like that, we'll actually ask them to evaluate that stone in person while we're talking to them to see how close they are on grading. And it's gotten to the point with some of these labs, I'm not going to flat out name them, but we've talked about it in our store before with customers, but some of these labs have gotten so notorious for being off by so much, and it's actually led to some lawsuits and stuff like that, that even some of our diamond vendors have stopped taking stones that were graded by these certain labs because, for one, they're just going through so many stones that they don't have the manpower to regrade all of these stones on a continual basis. And really, when it comes down to it, when they get some of these certificates in, they're consistently off so much that they might as well just be buying the stone sight unseen without a certificate because
They probably
it's
got
not
the-
going to do them any
They
good.
probably got the dimensions right in the weight.
I've even seen
Yeah,
that
I
be
know,
off,
I
which
know,
is
but
even crazy.
You
You've got dimensions of the stone that you can actually physically measure, and I've actually seen some of these certificates where they're actually off on the dimensions, and all they had to do was measure it, and they couldn't even do that correctly. So by going into your jeweler and saying, "Hey, I want a certed stone," that doesn't guarantee you anything. You need to make sure that the jeweler that you're going to see is well educated, knows what it is that they need to be looking for when grading that stone, so that they can interpret these certificates, if they have a certificate with them, to make sure that what they're selling to you is accurate, and so that you know what you're buying is accurate. And sometimes it actually pays to buy something that is not certed yet. And I mean, you can still grade stones because this certificate, when it comes right down to it, it's just a piece of paper. And what you're buying is the stone, not the piece of paper. This is just the info that comes with it. It doesn't guarantee that that information is correct 100% of the time.
Right.
It's just that some labs are much better at it than others. That's why, for the most part, if we sell a certed stone, they're almost always going to be GIA or AGS, just because we know that they're consistent. And if we represent that certificate, we feel good about what they're calling that stone. And so with these other ones, we've just kind of stayed away from them because until we get them in front of us, we can't
still
see
actually bought those stones, but for the most part, they don't get the cert with the stone.
No, we'll even sell them as basically an uncerted stone, even though they may be. The cert is so far off.
And to
that
give you an idea,
it's not worth it.
Of how this has gotten to be is probably been a couple years ago now, or at least a year ago. There was a major New York broker of diamonds that had a certed diamond list. And there was a lab that had gotten so
Terrible at grading.
that all of their diamonds were decerted. They still had them listed, but they said that they basically were not a certed stone. They considered them not a certed stone.
Yeah,
So,
they could have done better with a monkey and a flashlight in a dark closet.
yeah. Well, maybe didn't even have to have the monkey.
No, the flashlight in the
Well,
closet.
I'm not sure the monkey could do anything anyway.
Could do better than some of these lab reports we've seen.
So I know this may have not been the most
Exciting.
Yeah, we didn't get to show you all the pretty stuff or whatever, but the other thing I guess that probably needs to be talked about a little bit on the certs is, again, color and clarity are rarity factors.
Yes.
You know, it really has, for the most part, all those grades have nothing to do with how pretty that stone's going to be. And
So,
I say that
A D
whenever
flawless doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be more beautiful than an HSI 1.
right.
It's just the rarity factors there. Because, in
It's
fact,
a little bit
depending on cutting,
You know, and I may offend some art people out there or whatever, but it's almost like some masters out there. You know, there's some paintings that are like millions of dollars, and I understand that they're rare and they're still pretty, which that's the same way that happens with some diamonds. But at the same time, there are maybe some more contemporary artists or contemporary paintings that maybe even are prettier, but they're not as expensive, but they're not as rare.
yeah.
So that's a little bit with the color and clarity. And I say the beauty, whenever you get a stone that has a lot of clarity in it, where you can see it pretty easy and point, and somebody else can see it on your finger and point to, what's that black spot in there? Or,
Yeah.
or why does that, I'm not going to say that, that's really cloudy looking.
Yeah.
You know, then I think that starts to affect beauty.
Yeah. You get into the ones we call frozen spit.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
Well, why not? It's a fun term.
But the other thing is, like on color, we have ingrained, the jeweler has ingrained in the consumer's mind that you need to have free of any tint
color.
or shade.
Yeah.
But you get to on the other side of Z, we get into what's called fancy colors.
Now, one thing we need to clarify on this, though, is with color grading white diamonds, that is only relevant to brown and yellow shades.
And gray.
Some grays.
As long as it doesn't get
That's
too
a gray
fancy.
area.
Yeah.
But any other color, any other shade, if it's blue, pink, purple, red, whatever, if it has any shade of that, that automatically becomes a fancy colored diamond. So with the shades, with the white shades, it's actually only affecting, for the most part, just browns and yellows.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you do get into a silver diamond that can be
Yeah.
rare and expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just one of those things we want to make you guys aware of, because we know that there is a lot of confusion out there. We know we have a lot of people come in and,
Well,
like I said, ask for those certain.
Well, and we have a lot of
grades,
people. A lot of people
but-
come in that are asking for a certed stone, and I'm going to say a lot of times, what they're asking for and maybe seeing at other places is not actually
what they
they're
think
asking
they're
for.
or what they think that they're
right,
looking at.
because there is a difference between labs.
Yeah, there is. And so it's one of those things that when it comes down to it, you got to find a jeweler that you trust, that you know is educated and can show those differences and everything. But you know, you got to know what you're buying, and
Are we giving something away this time?
yeah, I don't know which one to do. We've got some pretty Goshenites that we could do.
Okay, we might do a ghost night.
So
Okay, so now,
we got to ask a question
Yeah.
without giving them the answer.
how
right away.
many shades of white diamonds are there in GIA's grading scale? That's a good one to know.
That one's-
What number are there?
Well, I think you only mentioned it once, so that may be kind of tough.
Did I only mention it once?
I think you only mentioned it once, yeah.
Okay.
So why don't we do, um,
So okay.
What is the color? What is okay? We can go
The
on
highest
color.
color grade?
What is the highest color grade on the GIA
Of white
grading
diamonds.
scale of white diamonds? What's What's the whitest of the whites? We'll give you a hint. It is a letter. So at that point, now it gives you 26 options there. But reality is there's fewer than that,
Yeah.
which would answer your first question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, and this is for we don't have one in front of us, but we've got some Goshenites, which is white beryl,
Mm-hmm.
that can somewhat resemble diamond a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. So they're really pretty. But for you to win one, we're asking what is the highest color grade for white diamond? Yeah.
I guess you could almost say the rarest color grade of white diamond.
Yeah, this is true. So
I guess, and what do? We can tell them who the winner is later, because I don't know that anybody's going to.
yeah, we haven't had anybody guess yet. So yeah, the first one
Maybe we put them all to sleep.
we may have. We've been going a long time on this one. So, but there's a lot of information to cover on this too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something that we can really thoroughly. I think we've done a pretty good job explaining it, but there's still a lot that we couldn't. Hey, Raquel actually answered the first question.
Wow.
I'm impressed. Wow. Well, you're our winner because honestly, I didn't think after just mentioning it that one time that we'd have somebody guess that. But yeah, Raquel, you're our winner. So
What was
yes,
the winning?
23 shades of white diamonds. That's right. So, and to answer the other question, it was D is where the color grade starts. So D is your most colorless, rarest.
Of any tenor shade of any other color.
Yeah. So we thank you guys for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to stop by here at Suzann's. We're at 4254 South Alameda here in the Town and Country Shopping Center, or give us a call, 361-991-7565, or you can check us out on Facebook, obviously, or at our website, suzanns-jewelers.com. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.